Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Joel Chasnoff.
Today, I'm joined by comedian Joel Chasnoff. Joel is a stand-up comedian, a former IDF soldier, and the author of several books, including the newly released Israel 201.
Thank you. Boker Tov, everyone. Hey!
Joel Chasnoff is a household name in shuls all over the U.S. and Canada. He's performed at more than 1,500 Jewish events in 10 different countries, from the Melbourne Comedy Festival in Australia all the way to Israeli late-night TV.
You fall in love with everything Israel when you're 17 years old and you go for the first time. What's the first thing you notice when you get off the plane? It's the Israeli soldiers. I mean, because they're 18 years old. They're 1 year older than I am. I'm 17, they're 18, and yet they're so different. They have Uzi machine guns and berets and forearms like bricks. And then there's me, slathered in sunscreen, wearing a fanny pack, stuffed with lactose pills. Who would you rather be?
His comedy is clever, clean, and positive. And in Joel's words, it's hip, wholesome stuff about the joys and oys of Jewish life. As a comedian and public speaker, Joel is in a unique position to teach techniques for establishing a connection with the audience right from the start, so they'll want to follow you where you want them to go. Techniques for appearing confident and in control on stage, so the audience will trust you and be more likely to follow you. And the power of vulnerability, which can make people feel less alone and isolated when they can see themselves in you. We also talk about how to be relatable and how to create intimacy between speaker and audience. This interview is like a master class on audience engagement and attention management, and I hope you enjoy it as much as I did. So, without further ado, here is my conversation with comedian Joel Chasnoff.
Well, let me begin by wishing you a happy birthday.
Toda Rabah.
You're 8 days older than I am.
Nice.
Yeah.
Nice. Big year for both of us.
That's right. That's right. It said that on your Wikipedia entry, that's where I get my all my
always the highest level of scrutiny.
Yeah, accurate
for research
accurate.
And verification. Yes.
Right. You probably wrote it, right?
I did not actually. I don't know how it got there, but it's been a long time.
So my question is that it said that you gave a shot at stand up and then you dropped it and then you moved to Israel and then you came back to it and then all of a sudden you find yourself working for opening for Jon Stewart. Like, walk me through that journey. How did you go from stand-up dropout to?
Sure. Look, during college, I knew I wanted to serve in the Israeli army, but it was scared to. That would be a big life move, a huge transition. My parents didn't want me to, and I knew I wanted to do stand-up, so I moved to New York and kind of tried stand-up, but the whole time I was bugged by this desire to go serve in the IDF. And so the way I approached the stand-up was not very serious. It was, I don't want to swear, but like a half a try, not the full try.
Yeah.
After I got back from the army and got the IDF out of my system, I was able to really pursue it seriously. And so I came back to the US after serving in the army in Israel, began doing the whole open mic thing, finding other places to perform.
And where were you?
And then opportunities came.
Were you in New York?
After Israel?
Yeah.
At first it was Chicago. It was 3 years in Chicago doing some Second City and Improv Olympic training and working my way into the Jewish world as well. Very quickly I found that the Jewish world was a good spot for my stand-up because my humor really has that Jewish angle that's not just self-hating, that's what a lot of Jewish comics do, but really is based on growing up in a Jewish home, having a Jewish life and being proud of it, but also finding the absurdities in it. That's what my comedy is. Yeah. And so quickly, I kind of discovered that was my niche.
Was that when your first shot at stand-up when you were in New York? Were you doing that also? Was that your?
No, first shot of stand-up was pretty much your cookie cutter template of what a comedian would do: going to terrible open mics in awful locations, waiting in line for a spot to audition at the comic strip, and then, doing your 3 minutes, being told you didn't pass. I mean, it was brutal, but there was no Jewish angle. It was, and I think also that's why it didn't work. Is I was doing the comedy that I thought you were supposed to do to pass into a club, as opposed to what really spoke to me as a person.
So then you come back from Israel. You're what, 24?
come back from Israel at that point, 25.
Wow. And you have this army experience behind you.
Have the
And
army behind me and a little wiser, a little more mature.
yeah, and then you start kind of mining yourself for your Jewish material.
Well, a few things happened. I still did the open mic thing and tried to get what you might call mainstream secular performances at clubs in the US and did some and got opportunities and they went well. But I also made some connections in the Jewish world and they invited me to perform and those shows just seemed to flow so much better. I could talk about the things that really were important to me. I was connecting with the audience on a visceral level, not just making them laugh, but sharing a story and I really enjoyed that a lot more. And also from a business opportunity, there was, Jews talk, and if a show went well, they would recommend me somewhere else. Whereas in the club scene, you're literally just a part of this big ocean of comedians, and a lot of people are interchangeable. So I couldn't stand out as much. So the
Right.
Jewish world really made sense.
Right. It's a feeding frenzy. I remember I did the open mic circuit in New York City in
Oh, so you know.
19, yeah, in 19, it was 97 to 99. And New York's oversaturated, so there's no work there. You're just basically open micing, and you have to go out to Jersey or Long Island or places like that to work. And it was tough. I remember, and it's so let me ask you, when you decided to kind of funnel towards the Jewish world for your work. Did you feel like you were missing out on like the opportunity to like get on the Tonight Show or something like that? Did you feel that like was that part of your aspiration as being a
Look,
comic?
that's a great question. I think everyone who goes into comedy has the aspiration of being on the Tonight Show, one of those other late night shows, TV spots. And there was certainly a part of me that was like, how could I leverage this? Or how could I create a 5 minute bit from what I do that could actually work on that? The older I've gotten, it's become far less important to me to the point where now it's not important at all. But at the beginning, sure, there was definitely that competition of like, okay, on the one hand, I have audiences who really appreciate what I do and that I connect with. But on the other hand, all of the mainstream credit is not in doing Temple Bethel, it's in doing the Tonight Show and these other, sort of places. So how do I navigate those conflicting feelings? And I think mostly it was just with time. I think if I had really decided I'm going to create a set that can work in a on a Tonight Show and go out into the clubs every night. But that's the other thing I discovered. It's not just about having a 5 minute set that works on TV. It's about being part of the scene and being out there night after night and just in the vibe of it. And I didn't have the love for going out into clubs night after night. And there's some comedians who they love that. And it's the highlight of their day is going out to the open mics, going out to the clubs at night. That was never me. I always kind of did it begrudgingly, not with a full heart. And I think that's a sign too. You have to listen to your feelings and that will guide you.
Yeah, a lot of waiting around.
And some are happy to do it. I wasn't.
Yeah,
So,
yeah. So it's interesting to me that you describe yourself as having a bug to go to the army. Most people have a bug to do stand up, and that bug, overwhelms every other bug that you might have. It's
right.
interesting to me that your primary bug was the army and your secondary bug was stand up.
Yeah, from I think the age of 15, 16 on, I kind of got obsessed with the IDF. And part of it was the teen tour I went on when I was 17 with Camp Ramada, Israel. Part of it was hosting exchange students during high school. And the Gulf War in I think it was 91, the first Gulf War, where Israel was hit by Scud missiles, like all these things together, it really, look, I'm a comedian, but I'm a very serious guy, sometimes to the disappointment of people. And I think a lot of comedians are. We tend to think a lot, brood. And on a very serious level, I feel that if we're going to call Israel the homeland and our homeland, then we shouldn't do something too. And there was also the cool factor. Like, I really love the idea that these 18-year-old Israelis were not going off to college and joining frats and partying, but were putting their lives on the line for a mission that was so much more important than any of that. And it never left me. I always felt that I wanted to do this, and more importantly, that I would regret it if I didn't. And I get emails from kids now in, 18, 19 saying, I'm thinking about joining the IDF. What do you recommend? And the one piece of advice I tell them is if you feel your life will always have something missing if you don't do it, then you should do it. But if you're kind of toying with the idea and you're not sure, then don't, because it's too hard and you won't enjoy it. But, I felt my life would be empty if I didn't do it. And that's ultimately why I decided to go.
And how many years were you there?
Well, the time in the army itself was 1 year because I was 24 when I actually went in, and they scale back your service from 3 years to 2 to 1, depending on your age. And 1 year was the perfect amount of time. I served with 18-year-old Israelis, which is what I wanted. I wanted to be with the real soldiers. I went to Lebanon, which was important to me to serve in a combat role, got a taste of it, but didn't spend 3 years. 3 years is an enormous amount of time. And now it's actually less. 2 years, 8 months is what guys do. But even that is a long time. And 1 year at the age of 24 was plenty.
Yeah. How was the training? How'd you find that?
Physically, the training was okay, and I handled it. I was in tanks where the physical training is not as difficult as infantry. It was the mental side that was extremely hard and different from anything else I had known. Whether it was sleeping in a tank, which is a tin, a metal box at night, you're freezing in the Golan, or just not sleeping at all, being bossed around by commanders 24 hours a day. Like that's hard to turn over your freedom. So for me, that was much more difficult than the physical training. I spent a lot of time trying to get in shape and running, and it turned out that was less relevant than just the shock of being a 24-year-old American in a system set up for 18-year-old Israelis. That to me was the biggest conflict and the difficulty.
Wow. So okay. So take me back to so you're back home now, 25 years old, and you're
Right.
doing stand up, finding your niche in the Jewish area. And how did Jon Stewart come along?
But what I found in life in general, the older I get, is most things that come along just come along. That the more I always tried to engineer things, the less it worked. And just about everything good that I do have in my life came along, as we'd say in Hebrew slang, befuks, by chance. And so Jon Stewart, how'd that come along? It was actually a Hillel gig. There was the Hillel at the University of Pittsburgh, decided to have this huge weekend of events. And the cornerstone was this stand-up show where Jon Stewart was going to headline, but they wanted an opener and someone who had like sort of a Yiddishkeit Jewish content. And the director of the Hillel reached out to me and flew me out to Pittsburgh to be the opener at this 3,000 person event
Wow.
in Pittsburgh. And it was great. I mean, it was I still look back on it as, shows blend together over the years, but that's one I'll always remember.
That's amazing. Yeah, I saw him do stand up at NYU. This must have been 1996 or 97 or
Same
something.
time period, and it's back when he would do that, when he would still go to colleges. And
Yeah. So tell me some of your inspiration in comedy. Who do you look up to? Who do you
Sure.
grow up admiring?
Yeah, I mean, it's changed. When I was younger, it was who, and now it's what. So when I was younger, I really I love Steve Martin. Like I remember I grew up in Evanston, Illinois. I would ride my bike to the Evanston Public Library and check out a record of his comedy and listen to it. And if you're under 30, there are many things in that sentence you might not know exist. Records, libraries, bikes. But I would listen to his album over and over, and he was just silly and goofy, and I loved him for it. He was also on the Muppet Show, and so I was exposed to him at a young age. And always was and always will be my favorite comedian. And a lot of other comedians say the same thing. Steve Martin inspired a lot of people in my generation. Now it's more, what do I look up to? The type of comedy. And I like comedy that's efficiently written, where the joke is funny on paper, where you don't need to make a silly face or move your body in a way for it to be funny. So I really love well-crafted, clever, efficient humor. And that's everyone from Jim Gaffigan to Dave Attell and Jeffrey Ross. Like those guys just have excellent writing, and that's what I'm attracted to.
Economy of words.
Economy of words, exactly.
Yeah. I think they also call them math jokes. Do they call them?
I've never heard that term. What do you mean?
Yeah, it's there's nothing that needs to be added to it. It's just an equation. It's just something that just simply works. There doesn't need any buffering or anything supporting it. It's just an equation.
That's a great way to put it.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember where I heard that term. But so tell me about how your style
Don't worry,
evolved.
podcasters. We're just thinking. That's silence there. I mean, listeners.
Yeah. Tell me about your style, how you started out and how you evolved over the years.
Yeah, I mean, the style starting out was probably what every comedian style is at the beginning, just imitating who you liked. So throwing in
Yeah.
a little bit of Steve Martin here and Robin Williams there and Jerry Seinfeld there. But eventually, the more you start doing it, the more, look, you get confident. And once you're confident, once you know you can get laughs, then you can relax. You can stop trying so hard. And your style sort of takes care of itself. Like you should never try to have a style. It's more like when it starts to feel right and comfortable. Oh, that's my style. It's just being a little bit of a heightened version of myself on stage. There's nothing added on. And there are comedians who their whole style is to turn it up a bit, whether it's, Dice Clay or, Gallagher. Those guys are a heightened, a character. But that was never me. It was just being me with a little bit of a boost, a little bit extra.
So in the beginning, it's more scatter shots, just throwing stuff against the wall, seeing what works.
I mean, in the beginning, it's so much fear. It's the heart literally, pounding and nausea before going on stage that you just want to survive and not be hated. And so you're doing in every moment what you can to survive. But I think that when the more you do it and the more you say, oh, look, I'm getting laughs, I don't need to try so hard, you fall into the style that suits you.
Yeah. How long did it take you to shake off that fear and develop let's say a cruising altitude of confidence?
Yeah, I mean, look, the heart still patters a little bit harder before a show, but there's not that fear of death that I used to have. Probably, I mean, at least 6 years and maybe closer to 8, before I could really know that I belonged doing it.
Wow.
Which is a long time when you think
Yeah,
about
that's
it.
a really long time. People don't get it. I remember for me, I think it was about 2 years of doing open mics 4 or 5 nights a week until I finally felt I could do this, and then you're right. Then you just have to learn your style and actually,
But that's why so many drop out, like the so much about comedy, whether it's improv or stand up, it's just about sticking around. And if you just stick around and keep trying to get better, that's the best advice. You can take classes, you can read books, but at the end of the day, if you just keep trying to get better and watch other comedians and see what you react to, because what you like usually indicates what you want to do yourself, that's the best school you can. And 90% of your classmates will drop out. So you don't have to worry about rising to the top. Like most people will just leave. It's just too hard.
Yeah, yeah. You have to really want it. People don't get that.
Absolutely.
So talk to me a little bit about so you admired Steve Martin and kind of the zaniness, and
Totally.
so how did you go about? Did you write? Did you just try things on stage? What was your approach?
It's various things. We've all had those moments when golden ideas just sort of come to you and you don't know where they came from and they become the best jokes in your act. And others, it was literally sitting down with notebook and paper and saying, I know there's something funny about this concept and I don't know what it is, and experimenting and trying. And then often the real killer punchline will come on stage in the moment, almost as an improv, but it's been brewing in your brain behind the scenes for a while. But it has to be a mix of rigorous sitting down and treating it like a job and being open to inspiration and not throwing anything away. Mitch Hedberg had this great joke that if I think of a great joke and I have a pen and paper, I write it down. But if I don't have a pen and paper, I tell myself it wasn't that great of a joke. Like the point being that if you don't write it down, you're not going to remember it, and you have to keep track of the things that are even remotely possible to be turned into jokes.
Well, let me ask you: Did you tend to work clean in the beginning, or were you?
In the beginning, no. In the beginning, I kind of thought I wasn't dirty. By no means was I ever filthy. As a Jewish boy, I went to day school. Like there were certain lines I just never felt comfortable crossing. But in the beginning, I actually thought it was funnier to swear and funnier to be kind of, as we say in Hebrew, gas, rude. But I think that was insecurity. For me, now I am totally clean, and I have been at least. I sound like some sort of recovering alcoholic, but I've been totally clean for at least probably 12 to 15 years. And I think it's funnier. Like I see it as a challenge that when you can be completely clean and get people to laugh, and I'll tell you this, audience members love it too. A lot of audience members have a preconceived notion of what comedy is. One of the best comments I get after a show is, I wasn't planning to laugh. I usually don't like stand-up, but I actually did laugh. Because I think a lot of people are put off by the filthiness that they see so often, and that when they see a comedian who can be clean for an hour, it's like a ray of sunshine shining down upon them.
Yeah.
But it makes you funnier too. It forces you to be more clever.
So tell me about the hour, because I know people's attention spans are down these days, and
It's funny. Yeah.
there's fatigue. You know, people just, even when they're being entertained and they're having a good time, there's a certain fatigue that sets in. How do you tell me your view on that?
Yeah, look, it depends on the context of what else is going on. So if I'm performing at an event where there's a dinner and speeches and slideshow, then I will say the max we should have is 30 minutes. Doesn't matter how funny it is, people will not be able to tune in for more than that. I do a show every year on Christmas in New York, Christmas for the Jews, which happened, a couple weeks ago. And even that, I had a number of really great comics on the bill, but I made sure it was an hour and 15 minutes, the whole show, because like you said, doesn't matter how good of a time they're having, people just nowadays more than ever tune out. So yeah, I'm very conscious of it. And yeah, the attention span factor is important to take into account. But I also think if you can be funny enough that people will go along with you. They won't need to go on their phones. Although I will say, there's always that one audience member who, from the time you're up there, is texting, and doesn't matter if 99% of the crowd is not, I can always find that one person who's scrolling and kind of eats at me.
Well, do you ever address it head on, or?
I don't. It's not it's not my style and personality to call people out. Although I do think that if I just came up with the right line, I should write the same way you write jokes, you need to write lines to deal with these situations, whether it's a glass falling and breaking or someone texting during the show. I should probably script a few lines and have them ready, because I'm usually not so comfortable pointing it out, but I should.
Right. And, it's interesting to me that for some reason, the length is increasing. Is it?
I didn't.
Yeah.
Okay. Tell me about that, because I don't know.
It's about 2.5 hours is like the average.
What? What movies are you talking about besides like Oppenheimer and Barbie?
Any James Bond or Mission Impossible, or these, like lots of movies, the average length is well over 2 hours.
Wow.
And I'm just wondering if it's possible. I mean, because you're talking about cut after cut after cut, there's so much going on. But I'm wondering if it's possible for one person to hold an audience attention span for that long. I mean, Cosby used to be able to do, 2.5 hours, on stage, sitting down. And I don't know if he'd be able to do it today anymore. I just don't know.
I think at the end of the day, if it were engaging enough and funny enough, yeah, you probably could. But I think the bar is a lot higher. Like, there's so much more competition, like literally in their pockets. So it would have to be really really compelling and engaging for that 2.5 hours.
Yeah. So tell me how you open. How do you come in and just grab them right from the beginning, and don't give them a chance to get distracted or anything?
It's a great question, because in the early days, that was my theory: is come in and like pound them over the head with a great one-liner so that they buy in immediately. And my theory on that has actually changed. I now feel that the first 30 seconds, the most important thing to do is to connect with them on a human level. And it doesn't matter if you're not funny, but you have to be a real human being in the moment. You can't sound scripted or fake, and you have to somehow connect with them, and then they'll go along with you. So I've changed my approach to opening now. It used to be quick joke out of the hat immediately, and now it's much more about how can I connect with these people on something that they care about and show them I'm actually real and that we're in this together, even if I don't get a laugh.
What led you to that realization?
I think I'm kind of riffing here because I've never thought about it, but I think it was the idea that I would tell these big jokes at the beginning and I would get a laugh, and yet I didn't really feel like I had a relationship with the audience. Like I was showing them funny things to get the reaction I wanted, but they weren't really holding my hand and going with me on a path. And I think a great stand-up show is something where you're kind of walking with the audience on a trail and discovering things together. And if I wanted them to go on that journey with me, it couldn't just be showing them making them laugh with canned, prepared jokes. It had to be like a conversation with a person. If you're going to spend an hour with a person and it's going to be a good hour, the conversation has to be really real. And so you have to warm up to it. And I just discovered I could get more intimacy and more connection with the audience that way.
So tell me some of the things that you do to achieve that.
I get there early now. And so if there's a show, I don't just show up 15 minutes ahead of time. Like I'll get there and before anyone else is scheduled to arrive. And most of my shows now are for planned fundraisers and big events where there's a few hundred people coming and in a ballroom or, so like it's an event. It's not a comedy club, but I'll get there early. I'll spend some time researching about the Jewish organization or their mission. I'll listen to what people are talking about. I'll pay attention. Usually you'll get just some great nuggets listening to, the conversations people are having ahead of time, or there'll be a speech before I go on. And if you can just pick up on one or two things that you can relate to and then mention that and loop back to it, it shows that you're not just a scripted performer, but you're actually paying attention to them and that you get what they're all about. And that makes all the difference. So I pay a lot more attention to them. And that's the other big thing is I think when you start out doing stand-up, it's all about me. Like, am I funny? And then the longer you go along, I've realized it's take the focus off that. Give them a good time. Make this show about giving them a good time and them being happy. And you also get less nervous too, because now you have like a positive mission as opposed to a self-centered one.
Yeah. I saw someone said somewhere that the show begins, when you enter the room, not when you get on stage, but when you're in the room, just kind of, there's things going on way before you ever get on stage.
For sure.
Yeah. So interesting. So you don't strike me as and don't take this the wrong way, but
I can't wait to see what's coming next.
A laugh per minute type of guy, meaning that you don't necessarily feel the need to do that, that regimented, okay, it's been, 8 seconds at the last laugh. I mean, obviously there's an attention to that, but you don't strike me as that being that kind of person. You're more, you seem free to be able to explore and to expand and to have points with you. Where did you develop that freedom from? Where did you feel that?
Well, first of all, I think you're right. And at a show I did recently, someone came up to me and said, I feel like you're not just a comedian, but there's kind of an educator in you. And I think that's that's on point with who I want to be. I love the idea of teaching and kind of conveying certain values. And it took me a while to get used to it because there will be times on stage where there's probably a minute, like a full 60 seconds or more, where there aren't laughs. And, generally in stand-up, you do want to have that laugh per 20 seconds or whatever. So a lot of it was just confidence that like, you know what, I know I can go a minute now just talking about something meaningful because there will be a payoff and I know that the laugh is coming or that I've earned it with other laughs that came before. I don't think you can go on stage and have 3 minutes of intimacy with no laughs at all at the beginning, but you can earn it. And I also feel that audiences like that. I think audiences want more than just mechanical instinctive laughs. There's some comedians who their writing is so clever that all they have to do is say it and the audience laughs and they've got it down to a science. But I like having that conversation with them. But it took a while because you do have to give up that fear of them sitting there thinking, oh my God, he hasn't made me laugh in a minute. Is he even funny at all? So a lot of it's just confidence.
Yeah. I saw a clip of you. It was very funny. It was a conference. I'm trying to remember.
Okay.
I forget what it's called. There was let me see if I can pull it up here. It was the I forget the name of the conference. It was
oh yeah. I think in California with tell me the joke.
So, well, there were
what do you remember?
Jokes, but they were great. But my main point is that you opened and you said Boker Tov, and I'm like, oh, this is the morning, the lights are on. This is hard. I remember.
Comedy in the morning.
Oh my gosh! So how do you? It's obviously different. I mean, there's a totally different vibe. How do you approach comedy in the morning as opposed to comedy at night with the lights off and the intimacy and people packed together? I mean, there's like an auditorium.
I mean, look, even when I do a show at night, I like to have the lights on. I don't like spotlights. I like the idea that we're all kind of in the space together. and not comedian and then a wall and then the audience. So, I don't mind the Boker Tov show. I don't mind a morning show for a conference. My feeling is if they're there for a conference, they're there for a reason. There's something they all care about. Otherwise, they wouldn't have come together. And whatever it is they all care about, let's tap into that. And this was the one I'm thinking about, if I'm correct, is it was a conference about Israel and like where's Israel education going? And I was sort of kicking things off with some comedy. And Boker Tov would be an appropriate way to do it, also to tap into her whole relationship with Israel. So whatever reason people are there for, that guides me into like how to craft the show and the opening. And that's also why I don't enjoy the club comedy so much, because club comedy, they're there to laugh and that's good, but I like there to be a deeper meaning as well.
Yeah. So you mentioned that you like to be considered not just a comedian, a mechanical comedian, but also, I guess, someone who makes you think and who teaches you.
Yeah.
And there were a couple reviews on your reel that I watched on your site.
Okay.
And the ones they said exactly that. They said one of them was, he definitely held my attention and the humor was great. I learned a lot today. He has a very good sense of humor and he made us laugh and he made us think. And is that something that you specifically aim for? Is that more of a reflection on their part, or is that intentional? Are you really trying
Yeah,
to?
I think it's like style, which we talked about before. I don't sit down and think, how can I craft a joke that is going to make people think and learn something? But the more comfortable you get just being yourself, the more you allow your true personality to come out. And a big part of that for me is just the teaching aspect and like I said, the taking on the journey. So I think it's something that they are saying, but I'm happy to hear it. And it's a product of just being comfortable enough to go slowly and not just feel you need to tell a joke, but to share your point of view and why this matters to you. I mean, especially now in post October 7th Israel, there's no way to do comedy about life in Israel without acknowledging that Israel is different and that we're going through a challenging time. And when I first started performing after October 7th, I was thinking like, there's this elephant in the room. And then I realized the elephant in the room is the key to solving the challenge, not to pretend it's not there, but to say, wow, to actually go up on stage and acknowledge this is different. This is a little bit hard talking about Israel, but here's why I think we still can. And then once you've acknowledged that, it all becomes easier. I'm very big now into breaking the fourth wall, and that's a big change. At the beginning of the career, it was audience there, me here. But now I love going meta. I love talking about how we're talking about this now, or acknowledging the realities of the space that we're in. And I just think it bonds you to the audience so much more. I'm into that bond.
How are you dealing with the issue? How are you dealing with October 7th?
Well, I tell audiences, from the stage, from the get-go, like it's okay to laugh. That in Israel, humor is a big part of the coping experience right now, whether it's shows like Eretz Nehederet, like the sort of SNL of Israel, or social media posts that people are passing around, not making fun of what happened, but sort of poking fun at the absurdity of Israeliness and Israeli life and how Israelis act in this kind of situation. And that humor is essential. And just because we're laughing now for an hour does not mean that we're forgetting about all the horrible aspects. But look, we got to celebrate who we are too. And once you just sort of touch on a few of those points at the beginning, I think it relaxes people. It shows them that like, yeah, this is okay. There's no guilt if we're laughing for a little while. So
Yeah.
it does, but it does have to be addressed. It can't be, let's ignore October 7th for an hour. It's let's acknowledge what happened and see why that's still relevant for us to be together in a room like this.
Do you address it head on at all in terms of the humor? Is there any humor?
Yeah, I don't have jokes about, hostages or Gaza. Like maybe at some point I would, but for now it's more just about life in Israel from my point of view, having been in the army myself, having had kids go through the army, like that touches on it enough without touching on it, the completely.
Yeah. So I want to ask you a little bit about your book. You co-wrote a book this year with Benji Lovett.
Yeah.
Tell me a little bit about that.
The book is called Israel 201, and the whole idea is that it's the 201 and not the 101. Benji and I wanted to write a book that would come out in Israel's 75th anniversary year. So we took 75 aspects of Israeli life that people typically do not talk about. So usually books about Israel are about conflict, the occupation, the Green Line, wars, whose land belongs to who, all that. We said, well, this book is not going to be that. Instead, it's about cats and embarrassing Hebrew mistakes that new immigrants make and ethics in the Israeli army. There's a lot of humor in it, but there's also quite a few serious chapters in there. A number of chapters talk about Israel's Arab population. You know, a lot of people don't realize 22% of Israeli citizens are Arab. And so we looked at their communities as well. And the whole idea was to give people a deeper, more expansive look at what it's really like to live in Israel and to be Israeli. And even though it came out before October 7th, I mean, I really feel like so much of what's in there is relevant, whether it's explaining how government is often dysfunctional, the battles between religious and non-religious, and just the sort of the hubris of the Israeli army. On the one hand, the army is the most respected institution in Israel, but that it can also it can get so hung up on how good and strong it is that it can not take seriously some of the threats from the outside. And all this was in the book. And lo and behold, in October 7th, a lot of this did play out. So I think it's relevant, even though Israel in many ways has changed.
So I read a Times of Israel interview with you guys,
Oh, yeah.
both you and Benji. And so you said that you consider yourselves educators. And so what I'm curious about is that how do you people perceive you as a comedian? So you're going on a book tour with Benji and you're doing these workshops,
Right.
and people expect you to be funny, but sometimes you have substance that's not necessarily funny, but you know,
Right.
some serious stuff. How do you balance that, being the comedian and also being an educator?
Yeah, I mean, look, the comedy show itself is usually comedy, but when we do some of these extra workshops, they can be completely different. I think sometimes, though, that funny doesn't just have to mean jokes and laughs. It can also just be communicating things in a way that's easy and understandable and lighthearted. And I think a lot of Israel education, one of the problems with it is that it's been very serious, very rigorous, a little overbearing and overwhelming. And Benji and I try to bring an easiness to it where we can make difficult concepts fun to grapple with, easy to understand, and just a little more straightforward. And it's gone well. And I think people also, if they've seen the stand-up show first, they're more likely to pay attention to your other work because they like you and they know that they want to hang out. Look, I think comedians ultimately, the ultimate goal is like people just want to hang out with you for that hour. That's and in writing as well, having your personality come out. So you can get more of the education across if you've made them laugh.
Uh-huh. And when you meet a new crowd that you're, I guess, does the workshop immediately follow the stand-up, or is it?
Sometimes it'll be first. I mean, often what we did this past year is on Friday night after Shabbat dinner at the synagogue, we do a workshop. And so that was their first in with us. But that you're making your first impression
Yeah.
with that as opposed to the comedy.
Yeah, so I'm curious how you do that. How is your connection with an audience a little bit different when you're being a comic versus when you're in, speaker or educator mode?
I actually think it's exactly the same. Maybe there's not punchlines and setups, but working a crowd, knowing how to relate to an audience, that's the key. And good comedians, they know how to build that connection with the crowd. And if we think back on the best teachers we've had in our lives, it's not because they knew the most facts or had more information. It's because they were able to be interesting for those 40 minutes in high school or could make these stories feel relevant even though they happened a long time ago or they're not related to our lives now. And so the Israel workshops that Benji and I do, that's what it's about, is how can we convey our personalities in a way that we're friends explaining this to you and sharing this experience with you as opposed to educators coming in and hitting you over the head with facts and figures and in maps. And so much of Jewish education, I think, has strayed from this kind of path. And
Right, like
I think,
lectures.
yeah, and look, a lot of communities too, if we're just going to be completely honest right now, after October 7th, their first thought was to bring in, speakers from the consulate, the Israeli consulate, or other officials. I I feel it might be too strong to say that's a mistake, but I feel we should think of other options as well. What we really need are people who can be good storytellers, as opposed to just come in with the official badge and tell and say what we all know that they're going to say, the typical pro-Israel speech. So we need
Yeah.
better storytellers in Jewish education in general.
Right. I saw also you said that you guys didn't want these workshops to be just lectures, and you wanted them to be more interactive.
Oh, totally.
Um, and you developed a game, some type of
Yeah.
game. Tell me more.
Yeah. I mean, look, I don't want to talk too much about it because we're developing it into an actual copywritten game that would be sold because I think it's a great product for the Jewish world. But the idea is it's a game that really gets people having conversations with each other, stimulating conversation. And anytime we've done a workshop, at the very beginning, I tell the group, like, this is not a lecture. I do not want to be the only one talking here. I want you to hear from you as well. And it usually takes a while for the first hand to go up, but after that first person contributes, it's the dominoes tumbling. People are more willing to talk. And I think people are thankful for having a safe space where they can ask even the dumbest questions. A lot of times people will say, I think this is a really dumb question, and then it turns out it's a really complicated question that maybe for too long we've assumed people took it for granted, but just never bothered to spend the time of, explaining why a certain thing might be.
Yeah. So stand up is not a lecture, even though it's only one person speaking. It's obviously
Totally.
not a lecture. It's the I think I don't know if it was Seinfeld said, someone said that it's the laughs are their part of the conversation.
Totally. Totally.
It's a dialogue. Um, what advice would you have for, let's say, a rabbi who's getting up there to give a sermon, and he's not getting laughs. I mean, that's not his goal. He's not, he
Right.
may inject a joke in there or something like that. But how do you make something more of a dialogue as opposed to just a monologue? If you're not leaving that space in there for that interactivity through their
Right.
laughs.
But look, pauses in silence are so underrated. Like just taking the time to slow down and allow for some pauses in your speech, acknowledging your own humanity. Like I think it's always a mistake to go up and just read a speech. Instead, acknowledge what went into making this speech. Even something like as I was putting this, half tour, or as I was putting this Devar tour together, I suddenly remembered back in high school how I struggled with like just showing your own humanity and sharing a little bit of your personality warms people up to you. So there are actually these little tricks and techniques you can do to connect with an audience, and then once you have them, they're much more willing to go with you for the rest of it.
Yeah. What
But
would you
those two come to mind.
What do you say about humor? Like, how would you advise someone to use humor? Should it be a canned joke? Should it be,
It can be a number of things. If you are a person who's naturally able to be funny, and not everyone has that, and that's okay. But if then finding humor at the appropriate time is a great idea. Um, there's different types of humor. Self-deprecating humor, I think, in that kind of situation works better than putting someone else down, or for sure. But it can also just be it can be a canned joke. Starting off with saying like, this, my grandfather when I was young told me this joke. I've always loved it. Let me share it with you, and tell the joke, get the laugh, and then explain why that joke is relevant to what you're going to talk about now. There's this story in the Talmud about the rabbi named the Rava, and it says the Rava would begin every lesson with a joke, and only then he would teach his students. And I think the Talmud was saying that humor has a way of opening people up to concepts and ideas that a mere lecture cannot. So humor is powerful, and I think should be used.
yeah. What are some of your guidelines for how you use humor? Because we're living in a very triggered time, and people are very skittish about what's said, and people get very sensitive and offended. What kind of boundaries do you make for yourself?
I mean, for me, this is just like who I am as a person. Like anything misogynist, racist, sexist, like that's just not who I am in real life. I never swear in real life, and well, maybe once in a while, but it's not like I have to change drastically. Uh, but at the same time, I think humor and sarcasm can be a great way to get a point across. There's a lot of shouting right now on social media, and if you can be clever and find any little bit of humor in what you're trying to make as a way to help you make your point, I think it can make you stand out and go a long way. But it's also in a way it's harder than ever because people's attention spans are so short. And I'm not native to social media. Like You know how old I am, and you're the same age. I didn't grow up with it. I remember the principal at my kid's school said that our kids are social media natives, but we're social media immigrants. We have to learn it. And I was on a plane recently and saw the young woman next to me scrolling through videos, and I was amazed how like she would give each video less than a second, and if in that first second it didn't grab her attention, like she was on to the next one. And it made me
Yeah.
realize just how much competition there is. And if you want to use humor, like you can't take your time on social media. You kind of you got to grab them at the beginning. So that's something I'm still learning. That's a different art form.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. What stand-up techniques do you think can be adapted for public speaking contexts?
There's a few. I mean, some very basic ones is check out the microphone beforehand. And if it's a corded mic, usually what the sound guy will do to supposedly help you out is he'll wrap the cord around the mic stand 30 times so that it won't go anywhere. But as a comedian or a speaker, you then have to unwind it in front of the crowd. So now, like, anyone, no matter how good a public speaker you are, can go and make sure that the cord is not wrapped around. You can make sure that the lighting is good, do a sound check. Um, I think as a speaker, going slowly, the power of silence, like when you're willing to be quiet on stage, the audience thinks that you're really confident, and they actually kind of lean forward to see what you're going to say next. So that just train yourself to take a pause here and there. It communicates so much more about you, even if it's not true. You might be, really scared inside, but if you can take a pause on stage, man, the audience thinks that you're in control, and they'll go with you. So those are some of the techniques. Eye contact with certain audience members here and there. Um, and walking the stage, anything with speed, I tend to stay away from. So walk slowly, take pauses, use your hands, but not too quickly, but in a more methodical gesture. Those things project confidence and comfort that tell the audience, I'm worth listening to.
Yeah. How do you manage, let's say you have a tough act to follow, whether that act is funnier, than you perceive yourself to be, or there's something that's tragic or something like that.
I mean, I can't tell you how many Jewish events I've been to where right before I'm brought up, they say, and now here's a video about the recent terrorist attack, or about helping cancer victims in our community, and then, hey, here's your comedian Joel Chasnoff, and you got to acknowledge it like that. I think not acknowledging is worse. So usually acknowledging is the best way to go.
Just call it out.
Yeah, just to acknowledge how awkward it is to be doing comedy after all these people just spoke about their hospitalization or whatever it is.
Right. I think I once followed a documentary about the Kinder transport or something like that.
Perfect. Comedy gold.
Yeah. Okay, I just have a couple more questions for you.
Sure.
The next question I have is some of the best feedback that you've ever gotten after a show.
Well, like I've mentioned
Got in your
before.
mind.
Yeah, sure. I mean, like I've mentioned before, someone who said, I don't usually like comedians, but you actually made me laugh and I enjoyed it. Like, that's a huge piece of feedback. If you really want to get emotional, there have been some people who've come up to me and said, I haven't laughed in a number of years because of so-and-so tragedy in my family, and tonight was the first time. Like that reminds you of why you're doing this, that ultimately it's not about some of those prizes that you might crave when you're younger, like the TV show appearances and awards, but it's really about, in this world of ours that's so chaotic and can often be so troubling and overwhelming, man, if you can make people happy for 30 minutes, what a gift. That's why you do it. So that's the kind of feedback that really means the most to me.
Yeah. And then the flip side of that question is some of the times that you've been raked over the coals, some criticism. What sticks out?
I mean, look, we've all had our bad shows, and anyone who says they haven't is lying. I must say the bad shows I've had at the beginning, bad shows happen all the time. But since I got, let's say, good and any bad shows I've had, I really think it's because the environment was just absolutely off. The people, a large group of people standing at the open bar talking when you've already been brought up on stage. Like that's you shouldn't have to fight them. That's on the people running the event to make sure everyone is sitting down. Sometimes people are at an event with a comedian and they don't want comedy. They came for the fundraiser. They want to get home, and now, hey, we're throwing this other guy at you, and they're not expecting it or they don't want it like that. You got to work a little harder and try to win them over. So for me, those are the challenges these days. Like I know which jokes work. I know which jokes still need to be worked on. But if the environment is off, that's when I could struggle and need to pull out some of the other techniques I've developed.
As someone who's gone through a bunch of these experiences, do you try to head them off before you get to the venue? Do you
Look, I'll say no to things that when you're beginning, you'll take any show because it's money and because you just want to be on stage. And now, thank God I don't have to take everything. And so there are things I will actually flat out turn down. But others, I'm going to be, I'll talk with them and I'll really make sure we're curating the evening right. And I'll say, well, look, this can work, but only if the seating is like this, and only if I'm not following this, and only if you make sure the wait staff is not walking around clearing plates. All the things I've learned over my career that you need to watch out for. And there's really no way to learn these things except to suffer through them.
I remember I had a Hanukkah gig. It was the year before COVID, and it was out in the middle of Wisconsin somewhere. And I got there.
Already sounds great.
Oh, it was horrible. The audience didn't even speak English. They were all old Russian people, and they had no idea
Excellent.
what I was doing there. I was standing on like a wooden crate, and
Yeah.
the mic
Nice.
didn't work. I had to let go of the mic. And one of my jokes, the punchline was the words were "thank you." It was about like using polite language in like kind of very sarcastic types of ways when someone says, "thank you."
Right.
So I remember giving it my all because it was a really good joke. And then I was like 10 minutes in, and everyone just started clapping and got up to leave because they thought I was finished. There's only English
That was
words.
so good. That must have been his closer.
No, because they heard the words "thank you." They're like,
Oh,
"Hey,
right.
good night."
Yeah, I get it.
I'm like, how do I recover from this? I got 20 more minutes to go, and it was just
That's funny.
it was awful.
But you remember it. See, those are the shows that stand out.
Yeah, yeah, and not only that, but afterwards, a lady came over to me. One of the few English-speaking people there came over. She came over to me. She goes, "I just want to tell you tonight, those jokes about your family were horrible. I was so offended." She goes,
Thank
"You
you.
should be ashamed of yourself."
Thanks so much. Thanks for sharing.
Yeah.
Here's my card.
Right, right. So my last question for you is in terms of personal things. How much of yourself do you divulge in your act about, who you are as a person? How risky, how vulnerable do you make yourself?
Right.
Is that part of your comedy? And
Yeah, I think quite a bit. Like I don't, in general, like I don't talk about sexual things just in general or other, like that's like one area I just don't really talk about. But in terms of vulnerability and fears, like that's the best. Like I've definitely more of that the longer I've done stand up, the more I've been willing to open up about those kinds of things. And the more the audience relates. I mean, I think we all kind of walk around with that fear of like, I'm the only one. And when you see someone else willing to be vulnerable, then you sympathize with them and you feel less alone. And as a comedian, that can be very powerful as a way to get people on board. It's just to show them your own weaknesses and talk about them and, admit your infallibility. And I'm all for it. And I love to do it. It feels good afterwards also.
yeah.
Therapeutic.
Do you feel that there's a room for that in public speaking? Let's say, let's say
I do.
Yeah.
It depends what the topic is and what you've been brought in to talk about. But I think just about any area. Look, if they're listening to a public speaker, they're there to learn something and get something out of it. So whatever that means, there's a hole somewhere that we're trying to fill. So whatever that hole is, you can acknowledge that your own hole in yourself, whatever's missing, and relate to that. I don't think people want speakers who come on and know it all. And we've all seen those speakers and they turn us off.
Yeah. What would you say about, someone who might be a little bit uncomfortable thinking that, this is a professional setting. Maybe I shouldn't share part of myself as part of this talk. Do you think that there's room for that or
I think
maybe...
there are limits. I think sharing yourself can be a little bit, a medium amount, or a whole lot, and it depends on what the setting is. But I would say share something, because we find ourselves endeared to speakers and writers who are revealing a little bit of themselves. It feels good. It feels comforting. And just as a strategy, if you can reveal even something about yourself, you're going to win the audience over.
Yeah. Great. Okay, so tell me where we can get your book, where you're appearing, have people get in
Sure.
touch with you.
It's all on the World Wide Web. I mean, look, the best one-stop shop is the website, joelchasnoff.com. Maybe in the show notes you can put the actual link, but JOELCHASNOFF.com. And that has a page with comedy clips. It has shows where tour dates are listed, and you can see where I'm going to be. Everything about all my books is there as well. And look, also social media, which I've gotten more into because I have a great team behind me in Israel of these young women who know what they're doing, because I certainly did not before I started. And that would be like on Instagram at Joel Chasnoff, and same on Facebook. Oh, and I've got a new podcast. Can I mention that?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's called Inside Israel with Joel Chasnoff. Since October 7th, I started a podcast where the idea is to show people how the news is actually affecting Israelis. So it's not just regurgitating the headlines, but it's saying, okay, how is this actually changing the lives of Israelis who live in Israel right now? And I actually do it live every week on Zoom before a live audience, and then take the recording and post it as a podcast. You can find that on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. And the links to the live recordings are on the website as well, just in the newsletter that you can sign up for.
Mm-hmm. Great. Yeah, I'm excited. I'd love to listen to that. And,
yeah, awesome.
And what's like the ideal show for you? If someone wanted to book you, what would be, what's your ideal show? Where do you perform best? Under what?
Yeah, I would say like I love all kinds, but the ideal sweet spot would be a Jewish audience that cares about Judaism. So that I think pretty much sums it up. So not just a collection of Jews who happen to be in the same place, but we're here because we all belong to the synagogue, or we all support this camp, or we all give to this organization. There's a little bit of meaning behind their attachment to Judaism as well.
Okay, fantastic. All right, we'll be in touch, Joel. Thank you so much.
This has been a lot of fun. Thanks for having me, Daniel.
Okay, Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.
You've been listening to The Maggid Method, and I'm Daniel Steinberg. There's a secret that great public speakers know. Did you know there's a method for cutting straight through to an audience's heart, grabbing their attention and holding it, and making a memorable impact with your presentation? The best speakers in the world utilize it, and now you can too, every time you get up to speak. Download your free Maggid Method of Public Speaking template at maggidmethod.com, maggidmethod.com. The Maggid Method will teach you how to find your authentic voice, craft meaningful presentations, manage people's attention, and build unbreakable bonds with your audience. Go to maggidmethod.com and download your free copy now. Thanks for listening. Bye-bye.